The laughter began softly, the kind that pretends to be polite before turning sharp. Luis froze mid-step, the bucket's handle trembling in his grip. Near the marble pillar, the art critic held up a crumpled piece of paper he'd just found on the janitor's cart. "Look at this," the man said, grinning toward his circle of guests. "Even the cleaning staff is trying to be an artist tonight," the crowd chuckled. Champagne glasses clinked. Luis didn't move. He stood just outside the light spilling from the chandelier, the hem of his uniform catching reflections from the marble floor. His eyes flicked once to the sketch, a charcoal portrait of a young woman with a tilted smile, before he looked away. It had been a long time since he'd seen anyone react to his drawings. Longer still since he'd dared to share them. He bent, slowly, to retrieve the mop that had slipped. Behind the critic, a tall banner shimmered, the Metropolitan Museum Gala for Modern Visionaries. The irony wasn't lost on Luis. He'd spent weeks preparing this room for the event, polishing the floors until they looked like still water. He knew every corner of this place by scent and sound, the faint hum of the air ducts, the lemon tang of cleaning polish, the echo of expensive shoes across the foyer. He hadn't meant for anyone to see the sketch. It was something he drew during lunch breaks, tucked behind the supply closet door, small moments when his hands remembered what they once knew. Once, before the border, before the fire, before the gray years of silence, Luis had taught art at a public school in Mexico City. He'd filled a classroom with children's laughter and chalk dust, showing them how light could live inside a shadow. Then the fire had taken the school, and with it, his wife, his plans, his reason to stay. He crossed north carrying only a handful of drawings in a tin box. Now, at 45, he swept museum floors that displayed paintings worth more than everything he'd owned. And yet some nights when the galleries emptied, he sketched quietly. Faces of strangers passing through the glass doors, each one drawn in soft, smudged lines like fading memory. "Did you hear me, friend?" the critic said now, waving the sketch toward him. "Is this your masterpiece?" Luis looked up, his dark eyes calm but heavy. "It's just paper," he said softly. "You can throw it away." More laughter. Someone snapped a photo. The sound of it, the fake amusement, the shallow cruelty, pressed against his chest like a familiar bruise. He nodded once, as if to end it, and turned back to his cart. The mop squeaked against the floor, each stroke steady, measured, almost rhythmic. His heart beat faster, but his hands stayed still. Years of being unseen had taught him that silence was safer than pride. Yet as he moved, something in him stirred. A slow, quiet defiance, like a coal that refused to die out. He thought of the faces he had drawn, his students, his wife, the people no one noticed, and how each one still existed, if only in his lines. The critic's laughter faded into chatter, and the guests drifted away toward the next gallery. Luis remained by the pillar, gathering his supplies, when he noticed a small figure watching from the edge of the room, the museum's young intern, Sophia. Her eyes met his briefly, uncertain but kind. She glanced at the sketch still lying on the cart. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Luis didn't answer. He folded the paper carefully and slid it back into his pocket. In the distance, the orchestra tuned for the night's final performance. The lights dimmed to gold, and as the critic's voice carried faintly through the hall, Luis continued his slow work across the shining floor, unaware that the next set of footsteps approaching would change everything. The music had already begun when the museum director arrived, a woman in a tailored navy coat, silver hair pulled back, expression calm but alert. She'd been called downstairs because someone had left their cleaning cart in the middle of the main gallery, right between the marble pillars and the champagne tables. Luis didn't notice her at first. He was kneeling beside the pedestal, wiping away footprints left by the guests who drifted toward the orchestra. The critic stood near the buffet, still entertaining a few admirers, the crumpled sketch now folded carelessly in his pocket. "Excuse me," the director said quietly, her voice carrying just enough authority to part the small crowd. "What's going on here?" The critic straightened. "Nothing serious, Eleanor. Just a bit of humor. Our janitor was inspired tonight. He tapped his pocket. Drew something rather sentimental. Her eyes shifted to Louise. May I see it? Louise hesitated. The room had gone still again, the sound of the orchestra fading to a distant hum. Slowly, the critic unfolded the paper, smirking as he handed it to her. She took one look and stopped breathing. The sketch was raw, delicate, alive. A young woman, drawn in charcoal, sat with her head tilted just enough to suggest thought. Her hands were folded, the shadows beneath her eyes soft and human. It wasn't polished or grand, but it felt true. The director looked back at Louise. You drew this? He nodded once. Yes, ma'am. It was just for myself. For a long moment, she said nothing. The critic shifted uneasily beside her. Then she turned toward the open wall behind them, the Community Inspirations section, reserved for local artists whose work had been donated or discovered in unexpected places. Would you allow me to display it there? She asked. Louise blinked. It's only a sketch. It's more than that, she said. It's honest. The critic's smile faltered. The guests who'd gathered earlier now murmured softly, drawn back by the sudden gravity of her tone. The director held the sketch against the light. The charcoal lines caught the glow, the woman's face on the paper shimmering faintly in silver gray. Art isn't about where you stand, she said. It's about what you see. Her words hung in the air, quiet but heavy. She turned to Louise. May I? He nodded again, speechless. The director crossed to the wall, pinned the sketch gently to an empty frame holder, and stepped back. The spotlight above adjusted automatically, casting a warm cone of light onto the drawing. The crowd gathered, whispering now not with ridicule but awe. Louise stood frozen near his cart. The mop handle leaned against his shoulder like a forgotten staff. He couldn't quite believe it. That something drawn in the stillness of lunch breaks could stand here, among names carved in gold plaques. Sophia, the young intern, smiled through the crowd, her eyes bright. She lifted her phone, not for gossip, but remembrance, to capture the quiet moment when dignity was restored. The critic tried to recover, muttering something about context, but his words fell flat. For once, he wasn't being listened to. When the music swelled again, it wasn't the orchestra's strings that filled the gallery. It was the sound of slow applause. A few hands at first, then more. Not loud, not staged, but sincere. Louise bowed his head slightly, unsure what to do. The director approached him, her expression gentle. You belong here, Louise, not because of a title, but because you see. He swallowed hard. Thank you. I never thought anyone would, she smiled. Someone always does eventually. The applause faded into a peaceful hum. Guests began to drift toward the exits, their faces softened, reflective. Louise remained by the wall a little longer, staring at the framed sketch under its pool of light. The mop still stood where he'd left it, a faint trail of water glimmering on the floor, like brushstrokes across polished marble. When he finally turned to leave, Sophia whispered, "They'll remember this." Louise didn't answer. He only looked once more at the drawing, at the face that now lived in the museum's light, and smiled quietly. By morning, the cleaning cart was gone, but the sketch remained. Beneath it, a small plaque had been added overnight, untitled, charcoal on paper. Artist, Luis Navarro. And as the first sunlight reached through the glass roof, it touched the paper gently, as if the museum itself was bowing in apology.